Mark sat at his desk, the white expanse of the page staring back at him with absolute indifference. The textbook lay open, its spine cracked, but his gaze had long since drifted to the window. 10 minutes had passed since he promised himself he would finish the chapter. Now, the silence in the room was filled only by the hum of the refrigerator. His mind was already miles away, debating which movie to watch later, weighing the merits of one plot against another. The cycle was relentless. It started with the best of intentions. Sit down, open the book, begin to read. Then, the drift. A thought about a film, a memory of a conversation, a sudden urge to check the time. He caught himself drifting again. The weight of the unfulfilled promise pressed against his chest. He had been here for an hour, yet the page remained as empty. He was trapped in the loop of starting and failing, while the afternoon light slowly crawled across the floorboards, mocking the stillness. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Another hour had vanished into the ether, leaving nothing behind but the same blank page. Mark pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. His hands were trembling, a fine, rhythmic shaking that he could not suppress. It was the physical toll of the friction between his intent and his inaction. He looked down at his own fingers, watching them twitch against the edge of the desk, and felt a surge of sharp, cold irritation. He turned his head toward the phone. The screen was dark, a black mirror reflecting nothing, yet it exerted a pull that felt almost gravitational. It sat there, a silent, dormant magnet, calling his attention away from the work. He felt the urge to reach for it, to let the screen light up and drown out the mounting pressure of the unfinished chapter. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the static of his own indecision. He gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned pale, trying to anchor himself. But the pull of the device was relentless. He needed to move. He needed to break the connection before the silence of the room became unbearable. He stood up, his legs feeling stiff, and turned his back on the desk. He reached for the phone. His fingers closed around the cold, smooth glass, and he felt the immediate, reflexive urge to wake the screen. He did not look at it. Instead, he turned and walked toward the kitchen. Every step was a deliberate choice to sever the tether. He reached the high cabinet, the wood cool beneath his touch, and placed the device inside. He shut the door. The click of the latch sounded final in the quiet house. He stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling the absence of the digital weight in his pocket. He turned back toward the study. The hallway felt longer than it had minutes ago. He entered the room, and the space seemed to have shifted. It was no longer a place of stagnant frustration, but a vacuum waiting to be filled. He pulled the chair out, the legs sliding silently across the floor, and sat down. The desk was still there, the textbook still open, but the magnetic pull was gone. He looked at the blank page, then at the window, and finally, he closed his eyes. The silence of the room pressed against his ears, no longer an enemy, but a blank canvas. He felt the restlessness still humming in his chest, but he was simply present. Mark sat perfectly still, his spine pressed against the back of the wooden chair. He closed his eyes, shutting out the sight of the blank page and the window. He began to draw air into his lungs, slow and measured. He felt the cool intake against his nostrils and the steady expansion of his chest. The silence of the room was absolute, a heavy weight that settled over his shoulders. Then, a thought flickered into his mind, a sudden, sharp image of his dinner plans. It was an intrusion, a pull toward the future that threatened to shatter his focus. He did not scold himself. He did not tighten his jaw or clench his fists. He simply watched the thought arrive, acknowledged its presence, and let it drift away like smoke in a drafty room. He returned his focus to the rhythm of his breathing, counting the seconds of the inhale, then the pause, then the slow release. His heart rate, previously erratic from the earlier frustration, began to level out. The internal noise, the constant hum of worry and distraction, started to recede. He felt the tension in his neck dissolve. He was not fighting the world anymore. He was simply existing within the space he had carved out. Each breath became a small, quiet anchor, holding him steady in the center of the room. He was calm, alert, and ready to begin. Mark opened his eyes. The textbook lay open, the ink black and sharp against the white paper. He did not look at the entire chapter, nor did he consider the hours of work ahead. He reached for the small mechanical timer on the corner of his desk. He twisted the dial, the gears clicking with a rhythmic, metallic sound, and set it for exactly 60 seconds. The dial sat there, a small plastic sentinel marking the boundary of his commitment. He took one final deep breath, feeling the air settle in his lungs. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the edge of the desk, and lowered his gaze to the very first paragraph. The words seemed to swim for a moment, his mind instinctively reaching for the familiar comfort of distraction. He felt the urge to look at the window, to check the time, to stand up and pace the floor. He caught the impulse, held it, and pushed it aside. He pressed his index finger against the paper, anchoring his attention to the first sentence. He began to read. The room felt smaller, the world outside the window fading into a dull gray blur. Every word was a deliberate movement of his mind. The timer ticked, a steady, relentless pulse. The timer cut through the silence with a sharp, metallic chirp. Mark flinched, his hand hovering over the desk, but he did not pull away. Mark treated the next 20 minutes like a session of heavy lifting. Each time his mind drifted toward the street noise outside or the urge to check the time, he caught the thought mid-air. He did not fight it with anger. He simply acknowledged the pull, gripped it like a heavy iron plate, and forced his focus back to the page. His jaw tightened. He felt the strain of the effort in his temples, a dull, rhythmic pressure that signaled his mind was working against resistance. He read a sentence, then another, his eyes tracking the ink with deliberate, slow precision. When a stray thought about his dinner plans surfaced, he paused. He visualized the thought as a weight, lifted it, and set it aside, clearing the space on his desk for the next paragraph. The room remained still, save for the soft sound of his breathing and the occasional rustle of a page turning. He was building something, layer by layer, sentence by sentence. Every time his focus wavered, he caught the drift, paused, and brought it back to the text. The struggle was no longer a sign of weakness. It was the resistance he needed to grow. He maintained this pace, 10 minutes passing, then 20. His eyes locked on the words, his mind anchored firmly to the task at hand. The rhythm of the work began to change. Mark stopped counting the minutes. He stopped checking the timer. He simply followed the ink, line by line, as if the words were stones he was placing in a garden. He did not notice the silence of the room until he looked down at the floor. A sharp, bright rectangle of sunlight had crawled across the hardwood, stretching from the edge of the desk toward the center of the rug. It had moved inches while he was lost in the text. He looked back at the book, but the urgency that had once gripped his chest was gone. His breathing was shallow and steady. His eyes moved with a fluid, effortless precision that felt entirely new. He was no longer fighting the text. He was moving with it. He turned the page, the sound of the paper crisp and final in the quiet air. He reached the bottom of the last paragraph, his finger tracing the final sentence until it hit the margin. He stopped. The chapter was finished. He had not forced his focus. He had nurtured it. Mark closed the book. The sound of the cover meeting the pages was soft, a dull thud that echoed in the quiet room. He kept his hand resting on the spine, feeling the weight of the paper beneath his palm. He did not rush to stand. He did not reach for his phone. He simply sat, his shoulders dropping away from his ears, the tension of the last hour draining out of him. He looked at the desk, then at the empty space where the textbook had been. He realized then that the progress was not in the finished chapter, but in the way he had arrived there. Each minute of focus had been a single drop, and now, the pot was finally full. He felt the weight of his own potential settling into his chest, solid and real. He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. The noise of the world was still there, but it no longer pulled at him. He was anchored. He turned back to the room, the air feeling lighter, the space around him quiet and still. He had learned to nurture his own mind, and in that silence, he found a profound sense of peace. The work was done, and for the first time, he was ready for whatever came next.